We finally reach our snow cave in the dark, and we get in and we get the stove out, and the lighter won't work. We're used to not having any food on the mountain. We've been there before, and that wasn't worrying us. But this was a new game. The idea of not having any liquid was pretty scary. We pull out the sat phone and we put in a call. We call our agent and we say, Ali, we've summited. We're coming off the Diamir side. We're going to need help.
Good evening. My name's Nick Smith, speaking to you from London. Welcome to the 6th in our series of Alpine ClubCasts with Scott Ellsworth and Rick Allan. And Sandy Allan and Cathy O'Dowd are joining us later. For the second week running, we're in Pakistan, this time on the 9th highest mountain in the world, the 8,126 metre Nanga Parbat. I really hope you enjoy it. First, I'd like to introduce Scott Ellsworth, who's joining us direct from the University of Michigan. An American writer and historian, Scott is the author of The World Beneath Their Feet, a brand new book about Himalayan climbing in the 1930s. And it was then that Austrian and German dreams of mountaineering glory became firmly focused on Nanga Parbat. So, over to you. Are you there, Scott?
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you. I'm actually in my basement in my home in Ann Arbor, Michigan. To cut to the chase, I think it's safe to say that Nanga Parbat really holds a very special place in Himalayan mountaineering. It is this massive, beautiful, incredibly dangerous and deadly mountain. Nanga Parbat is 8,126 meters, 26,666 feet high. It is the 9th highest mountain in the world. It is also the westernmost of the 8,000ers. Of course, it's in Pakistan today, but in the late 19th and early 20th century, it was part of British India, and it was in that incredible triangle near Afghanistan and Russia as well that's part of the legendary land of the Great Game. In Sanskrit, Nanga Parbat means naked mountain, but in Tibetan, its name is Diamir, which means huge mountain. And it attracted the interest of European climbers fairly early on, most famously the great British climber Albert Mummery, who was disappeared on the Rockio face of Nanga Parbat in 1895. But during the 1930s, at least in terms of mountaineering, Nanga Parbat was very much a German mountain. And the reason for that had to do back to World War I. There were many Germans, but also many Germans in the German climbing community as well, too, who felt that Germany had been treated very unfairly with the Treaty of Versailles. And they felt that Germany needed to reclaim its place amongst the most leading nations of the world. And for some of those climbers, they felt that by having mountaineering glory, by having German climbers reach new heights, be the first to summit great peaks, that was a way that they could help in their own way to bring glory to Germany as well, too. The legendary German climber Paul Bauer, who's really the dominant figure in German mountaineering in the 30s, said it best when he said, "I put down my rifle and I picked up my ice axe." All right. So even though there had been a German-American expedition to Nanga Parbat in 1931, our story really begins in 1934 with this incredibly well-organized German expedition led by Willy Merkel. Merkel was a legendary Munich rock climber. He was a railway employee. He had lots of connections in the railway industry. He raised a lot of money for the expedition. They hired their own publicist as well, too. And this was national news when the 1934 expedition got going. In fact, their send-off at Munich's main railroad station, thousands of people showed up. The climbers themselves were showered by young German girls who were, throwing, rose petals on them and all that. And they take off. Now, of course, in the 1930s, it takes a while, not just weeks, but months to get to a Himalayan peak. From Munich, they ride the train through the Brenner Pass to Genoa. There they catch an old steamer called the Victoria, They take it south across the Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal, across the Arabian Sea, finally to Bombay or Calcutta, where they can take a railroad journey lasting several days to Rawalpindi. Eventually the railroad runs out there. They're on truck first and finally on foot. They, in fact, they left Munich on Palm Sunday, March 25th. They really didn't get going on the mountain until early June. Now, this expedition, though, I think is important to point out, also takes place during this key period in Germany where this old Germany is dying and this new Germany is coming into being. And of course, that had to do with the fact that Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party had taken over in 1933, and they're very rapidly transforming German society. And you can see those changes even in the expedition. On the one hand, the expedition had a German Jewish scientist, a geologist named Peter Misch, who was a part of the group. Very soon there would be no Jews allowed to take part in any German mountaineering expedition. On the other hand, the publicist for the expedition, Willy Schmid, in Munich, ended up getting murdered during the Night of the Long Knives. So they're in this kind of netherworld where it's changing. Merkel himself had been told by Nazi officials that he was expected to climb to the top of Nanga Parbat to win glory for the Third Reich. There were German, Nazi newspaper photographers were sent along for the early days. There was a group photo of the German climbers that beside them are the brand new swastika flags of the Third Reich. Interestingly, when the photo was taken, so many of the climbers were anti-Nazi, or at least they weren't Nazis. They put their Alpine caps on top of the flagpoles to show that they answered to a higher power, that of alpinism, rather than to the Third Reich. But when those photos appeared in German newspapers, the Nazi photo editors cropped out the top, so you just saw the flags. Anyway, Merkel put together, a crack team of experienced German mountaineers. A accomplished set of Sherpas were brought in from Darjeeling, and they got to work. But Merkel also had a plan. He had a new approach to the mountain, and he believed that rather than following the British model on Mount Everest and elsewhere, that instead, as the expedition got to the upper reaches of the mountain, that rather than spend a lot of time and energy painstakingly supplying all the upper camps, he wasn't going to do that. Instead, he was going to take one or two teams of crack climbers and have them make a dash for the summit, get up as quickly as they can, and then return as quickly as they can. All right. And incredibly, it almost happened. On July 6th, 1934, Peter Aschenbrenner and Erwin Schneider got to well over 25,000 feet on Nanga Parbat. They were within 1,300 feet of the summit. They're taking a break on a ridge, and they realize we can make it to the summit that day and get back safely. And but they think about it and they realize there's a problem there. And of course, they're smoking a cigarette while they're doing this in a fine mountaineering tradition. They realized that Merkel really wanted to get as many climbers as he could up to the top and have this wonderful propaganda photo of all these terrific, accomplished German climbers. But the other problem is that Schneider and Aschenbrenner were the only Austrian climbers. And they realized this is a German show. That wouldn't look good. So they finished their cigarette and then went down to Camp 8, which is being constructed. And their plan was that they were going to go ahead and ascend the next night. Instead, what happens is a tragedy strikes. A massive storm blows in to the camp, and it unleashes this series of catastrophic events that go on for 8 days, where essentially you have this death march attempt to get off the upper mountain to get down. In the end, 4 Sherpas and 6 climbers, including Merkel, died on Nanga Parbat. This was by far the worst tragedy in the history of mountaineering at that point. But ironically now, because of those deaths, there was now a belief in Germany that German climbers must climb Nanga Parbat. We're not interested in any of the other peaks. This is the one. It is our destiny. We're going to focus on that. So there's a return that happens in 1937, a new expedition. It's led by Carl Wien, who was another legendary Munich climber. He too put together a crack team of of German climbers. Once again, an accomplished set of Sherpas was organized in Darjeeling, brought to Nanga Parbat, and once again, tragedy strikes. On the evening of a little after midnight, on the evening of June 14th and 15th, a massive avalanche swept through a high camp, this time killing 7 German climbers and 9 Sherpas. 16 people lost their lives on that. And this is, of course, now the worst tragedy, surpassing the 1934 events. And obviously, this is gigantic news in England. These fallen German climbers are hailed as heroes. Their Sherpas are sort of patronizingly hailed as being loyal followers of these wonderful examples of the Nazi youth and the German Reich and all of that kind of stuff. But once again, now with 2 tragedies, Germans are even more invested in that we must get to the top of Nanga Parbat. And the mountain almost takes a mystical hold over German writers and intellectuals. This is all a part of a sense of a larger struggle that Germany is having, that the Nazi Party is having, that our destiny is going to be tied up in this mountain and that we must get to the top of it as well. Now, the climbers, and remember now we have fewer and fewer really top-notch German climbers, they're all dying, is they have a slightly different view, and they start privately referring to Nanga Parbat as Murder Mountain. And but once again, we're going to keep going. So in 1938, Paul Bauer decides that he's going to lead the next expedition to Nanga Parbat, in part because he didn't have anyone else he could choose. But so they take off in 1938. They don't get too far. Illness runs through the ranks. Weather's bad. The monsoon arrives early. But there's a little twist to the 38 expedition, which is, the Nazi war machine is already planning, for the coming war that they're going to expect. Bauer had worked with the Luftwaffe. The Luftwaffe was interested in creating some high-altitude bombers. And so he arrangement was made between Bauer's expedition and the German Air Force that a high-altitude German plane bomber would go ahead and airdrop supplies to Bauer's group on the mountain, which they did. It didn't work too well, but there was a twist to it, which is after the expedition realized they weren't going to get any higher, the Luftwaffe, they ended from Srinagar, I believe, they ended up taking them up, Bauer and the others, on an aerial tour of the mountain. They had never seen the mountain from the air. Bauer's looking down, he can see their camps 4 and 5 on the rocky face, but more importantly, he got his first view ever of the Diamir side. And Bauer looked at it and he saw what he felt was a climbable route to the top of the mountain. He realized that they needed to try that side, and this is the way they were going to get up. So they get back to Germany, and the next year, of course, 1939, Bauer sends out a reconnaissance expedition led by Peter Aufschneider and by this young sort of wunderkind German-Austrian climber, Heinrich Harrer, who had been one of the first to successfully climb the north face of the Eiger. So they set out, they go up. Aufschneider and Harrer get high enough on the Diamir face that they realize that there is a climbable route, and they are convinced. And when they write to Bauer and say, yes, there's no question. So in 1940, there's going to be no issue at all. Germans they're going to get to the top of Nanga Parbat. They are going to be the first nation to have climbers climb to the top of an 8,000er. Well, of course, events intercede. So Aufschneider and Harrer and the others make it back to Karachi. They're sitting in the garden of their hotel one afternoon, drinking bottles of German beer, waiting for news of when their ship is going to arrive at the port of Karachi and take them back to Germany, when all of a sudden 24 heavily armed Indian soldiers rush in. They are arrested because Great Britain has just declared war on Germany. And with that, German dreams of Nanga Parbat are going to be put aside for a while. So if you're interested, here's the commercial. If you're interested in these types of stories, of Himalayan climbing from the early 1930s to early 1950s, you might want to check out my new book, The World Beneath Their Feet. It's published by John Murray in the UK and by Little Brown in the United States. Thanks so much. I enjoyed being with you today. And now back to you, Nick.
Thanks, Scott. That's a really great way to start the evening. So thanks for that. Rick Allan and Sandy Allan are Scottish-based mountaineers who have been climbing together in the Himalayas since the mid-1980s. They first visited Nanga Parbat in 1995 with Doug Scott, Wojtek Kurtyka and Andrew Locke to attempt the unclimbed Mazeno Ridge, which is 10 kilometres long and the longest ridge on any of the 8,000 metre peaks. That attempt was unsuccessful, but the pair were sufficiently inspired to continue dreaming and scheming for a further 17 years. They climbed the Daimir Face route in 2009, and they returned in 2012 with Cathy O'Dowd, Lakpa Rangdu, Lakpa Jarak and Lakpa Nuru to make another attempt on the mountain via the Mazeno Ridge. This is that story. So I'm now going to hand over to Rick, who's joining us from Ware in Hertfordshire. Are you there, Rick?
Hi, Nick. Thank you very much. And thank you, Scott, for that introduction. Let me fast forward us to 1995. And we are looking at on Doug Scott's third attempt on the Mazeno Ridge. Wojtek, Andrew, and I got to this point about a quarter of the way along the ridge, maybe a little bit further, and we didn't have enough food. Obviously, the weather was looking doubtful. You can see the strength of the wind coming over the ridge, and we looked at one another and said, "No, this is probably for the next generation." And we turned around and reluctantly went down. If you're lucky enough to fly from Islamabad to Skardu on a winter's day and you look out of the window of your aircraft, you might get this view. This is the north side of Nanga Parbat. It's the Daimir Face, and the long ridge going off to the right is the Mazeno Ridge. It's almost 10 kilometers from the summit to the Mazeno Pass. It's almost about as long as the Kulin Ridge if it was stretched out in a straight line. That Daimir Face was finally climbed in 1962 by Kinshofer, and is now the normal route by which Nanga Parbat is climbed. Here's a mountain, a map of the mountain. You can see the red line coming in from the top right is where Herman Bull finally made the first successful ascent in 1953 via the Rakyot Face. The Daimir Face is the yellow line. The yellow line's coming in from the north. From the south, it's the Rupel Face, and Messner and Reinhold and Gunther Messner made an ascent of the Rupel Face in an expedition run by Karl Herrlichhofer, who was Willy Merkel's half brother, who developed his own obsession with Nanga Parbat, and there's a whole history all about that. Anyway, there, of course, Gunther Messner disappeared on the descent, and Hans Schell and Robert Schauer climbed the leftmost yellow line going up from the Rupel side to the summit, and we'll hear more about the Schell route later. The Mazeno Ridge is that long ridge going off to the left, west ridge of Nanga Parbat. Here above the Rupel Glacier, you can see the full extent of the Mazeno Ridge from the south, and the final summit pyramid on the right. The ridge had been attempted first of all by a French team, 3 times by Doug, twice by Wojtek, once by Loritan, and finally 2004, Steve Svensson and Doug Chabot managed to get all the way along the ridge and then had to retreat from the Mazeno Gap between the ridge and the summit. 4 years later, Stitzinger and Lunga got to exactly the same place and again had to retreat. But by 2012, Sandy and I had convinced ourselves that we were the next generation. So we invited Cathy O'Dowd, a very experienced Himalayan climber in her own right, the first woman to make the ascent of Everest from both sides. And you can see the 3 of us here in a hotel in Tarshing, the end of the road, when you've left the Karakoram highway and you're going towards the Rupel side of Nanga Parbat. And we've invited 3 Nepalis to join us. on this expedition. This is Lac Parangdu, Lac Pajarok, and Lac Panuru. The odds of finding 3 Lakpas in a row, you can calculate for yourself, based on the number of Lakpas there are in Nepal. Anyway, Cathy worked out that between the 6 of us, we had climbed Everest 29 times. Now that didn't have much to do with the Western climbers. That was all about these guys, because they had climbed Everest 9 times, 9 times, and 8 times respectively from the left. So what a hugely experienced team. These guys work for commercial expeditions as high altitude Sherpas, but they really wanted to climb for themselves and wanted to join our expedition as full climbing members. And so we had an amazingly strong team setting out to walk up the Rupal Glacier. This is the beautiful Rupal Glacier. 3 days of walking up these moraines on the glacier, and then we turn up to the right towards the Mazeno Pass, and we will be setting up our base camp up there. Here we are, finally at base camp. It's a short walk in. I think 4 days took us to this base camp. Nanga Parbat is one of the most accessible of the 8,000 meter peaks. Sadly, of course, that's probably one reason why just 1 year later, an expedition was massacred at the Daimir side base camp by the Pakistani Taliban. Anyway, you can see me and Sandy and Cathy in that photo taken by Lac Parangdu, who is undoubtedly the best photographer we had on the expedition. So we then spent the next 2 weeks acclimatizing, going up onto the subsidiary ridge that leads up towards the Mazeno Ridge. And you can see we're already getting into some amazing situations. We are forever balancing between stepping down onto the snow slopes on the right that might possibly represent an avalanche risk, and keeping a safe distance away from the huge cornices hanging over the Rupal side. So we 2 weeks of this, and we're really getting ourselves reasonably well acclimatized, and we're pushing up onto a dump at the start of the ridge, the tents, the ropes, the gas, and the food that we're going to take all the way along. And we finally get to the 2nd of July, and we have a good weather forecast. I had there were three things that were really different from 1995. Sandy and I had climbed the mountain via the Daimir side in 2009, so we knew the way off. Psychologically, there's a huge advantage. We also had a very strong team, people who could really take turns in breaking trail. It made a big difference. We knew we would have to carry a lot of food. And the third difference was that we could get weather forecasts in real time, which was a significant difference from 17 years earlier. I contacted the Met Office in Bracknell to ask them for these things, and they gave me a quote, but they said, "Oh, by the way, that location you asked about, you never get more than a few days good weather there." So I said, "Thank you, I don't really like your quote." But anyway, we got some very good weather forecasting from the Andorra Meteorological Office, and based on a great forecast from Andorra, we set off on the 2nd of July. By about the third day, we were getting into some really hard work. You can see we're into some steep soft snow, and this is really where having a bigger team made a difference, because we didn't burn ourselves out. We were all able to take a turn and share the burden. But soon we go on to some utterly spectacular territory. You can see here, that's probably me out there in the yellowish suit with Sandy coming behind me, moving together on this ground. Day 4. And you can see we've got a long way to go. I think that's Mazeno Peak in the foreground, 7,100 meters. So it's been climbed twice already by Shavo Svensson and Lutzinger and his partner. And the summit is still a very long way away. Here, it's not at all clear where we're going to spend the night because there just is no flat ground to put 3 tents up. And we end up sheltering under this boulder. There's room for 1 tent, and the boys in the foreground are excavating a ledge to sit on. And like Parangdu and I dig into the snow underneath the boulder, and we get half of a snow cave. So we settle down to this to our bivouac here, and we've got the stove going in the background. And Lakpa says to me, "You know, I've never done this before." And I look at him and I think to myself, what is this guy talking about? This is a guy who's climbed Everest 9 times. What does he mean he's never done this before? What? And I realized what he meant was he'd never been on a big mountain without a tent. Because when he takes his clients up Everest, they go to base camp, to camp 2 and to camp 3 and to camp 4. And he's always so organized. There's a tent for him, there's a tent for his clients, and nobody goes without a tent on a big mountain. And here he is with these crazy climbers from Scotland who have got him sheltered in a snow cave. And he says, "Are we going to be all right?" And I say, "Oh, of course we'll be all right." And by which I mean, of course, if the weather stays fine, we'll be all right. And if the weather doesn't stay fine, then we're going to have some fun. But anyway, we move on from day 4. In fact, we start to lose time. We just kind of get ourselves out of that pickle, and then the wind picks up, and we lose a whole day. We just sit in our tents and let the wind blow itself out. That's pretty much what was forecast. But we've now been at this a week, and so we're getting our way through our gas and our food. That is the Mazeno Peak. So we've just made the 3rd ascent of Mazeno Peak, and on we go. We came to a particularly steep rocky section, and we got around this with a huge diagonal abseil, which really defined this as a point of no return. We did leave a rope hanging down, but it's pretty unthinkable that we would have attempted to reverse this whole thing now. We were truly committed at the beginning of the 2nd week. And we knew from Steve Svensson that the best was still to come. The pinnacled section in the foreground is going to be the most difficult, most time-consuming section of the ridge. And it also produced the most spectacular locations. Here you can see 2 climbers in the suspended between heaven and earth on this incredible ridge. And we'll just linger on 1 or 2 of these photos because it was breathtaking to take part in. It was breathtaking just taking the photographs. It was quite a remarkable experience. And we spent 2 days getting through these pinnacles, and we finally arrive at some rock ledges on the far side of the Mazeno Gap. We've crossed the Mazeno the ridge. Now we are at the foot of the summit pyramid, and we camp here. Bit of a debate at this point. Do we just keep going, or do we take a day's rest? And eventually we're so worried about the weather and making good use of the decent weather that we decide we'll go for a summit attempt. And we set off very early next morning, just after midnight, and we really push hard. About mid-morning, Cathy and Lakpa Nuru decide to turn around, that they're not making enough progress. And not long after that, Lakpa Rangdu and Lakpa Jarok decide that they're going to turn around. They say to us, "Look, we're not going to reach the summit before late afternoon, early evening. We can't be on the summit in the dark. We've got to go back." So Sandy and I really reluctantly decide that we will go back with the others. And we very slowly and laboriously make our way back to the tent. Some of the ground we've covered is quite difficult mixed ground. It's quite It's quite slow. Tiredness is compounded with deep disappointment. The lads, Lakpa, Jarok and Lakpa Rangdu, take a big fall on a snow slope. They manage to, they're roped together, but they just can't stop one another tumbling past one another, and they go a long, long way down, almost over a serac barrier, and they eventually make their way back to the tents. Everybody's exhausted. Everybody is down, and we're pretty out of food, really. There's not much to eat, and the Sherpas decide they will definitely go down. Cathy has decided she wants to go down, and it looks like it's all over. And I guess I'm resigned to going down too. And in the morning, Sandy shouts across to me, "When you've had your breakfast," he says, "come over and let's talk about our options." And I'm thinking, we have options? He says, "Look, we don't have to go down. You know, the other guys are sure they want to go down. Well, let them take the tent and the rope, and we could keep one tent, one rope, and one stove, and just spend one more night here and just see how we feel." And I think, hey, why not? Why not? I'm not ready to give up. Cathy and the Sherpas are absolutely adamant they're going down, but they basically leave any scraps of food that they can. They leave with us, so we do have something to eat that night. And I went for a walk, and just above where we camped, I found this little cairn with a bottle of preserved fruit in it, and it was bottled in East Germany, so it must have been pre-89. It was probably left there by Hans Schell and Robert Schauer, so it was probably 37 years old, and it was very good. Anyway, in the morning, we feel good enough to abandon our tent and set off with just sleeping bags to go for the summit once more. But of course, we are fairly tired, and we don't make quite the progress that we thought we'd make. And we end up in the late afternoon at about 7,700 meters, and we dig ourselves a snow cave. Over the years, Sandy and I have dug a lot of snow caves, so this was no surprise, and it was okay, and we still felt reasonably good. We ate our last 2 digestive biscuits for supper and prepared ourselves to go for the summit the next day. But yeah, that was slower than we wanted it to be. There was a lot of cloud down that day, and there were 1 or 2 false summits, and we wandered about a bit. So it was 6:30 in the evening before we summited. You can see how long my shadow is there on the summit. But enormous satisfaction, really happy. And we've got a snow cave not very far below us to go to, so this is all good. And we finally reach our snow cave in the dark, and we get in, and we get the stove out, and the lighter won't work. Now, that we're used to not having any food on the mountain. We've been there before, and that wasn't worrying us. But this was a new game. The idea of not having any liquid was pretty scary. But Sandy had some waterproof matches, and that was our backup. But unfortunately, the waterproof matches weren't waterproof, so the backup didn't work. So anyway, a bit of trepidation. We kind of tried to go to sleep, and the next day I'm completely shot. I really put everything into that summit day, and I am useless. I can't break trail. I just don't have it in me there. Sandy has to break trail for the whole day, and we make our way slowly across to, it's almost not, there's not much descending, it's a lot of level ground all the way across to the old Camp 4. We're hoping there's somebody on the normal route, but there are no tents visible, nobody moving, no ropes, no trail. About halfway through the day, we pull out the sat phone and we put in a call. We call our agent, Ali, who's a really good friend, and we say, Ali, we've summited. We're coming off the Diamir side. We're going to need help. And at that point, the battery dies in the sat phone. But we know that he knows. So that's good. Anyway, next morning, oh yeah, digging the snow cave was probably my low point on the entire trip at this point. My half of the snow cave collapsed. I had to crawl into Sandy's half of the snow cave, and then the wall kind of gave in there. Bad night. We get up in the morning, but we're a little bit surprised, but we're still going. I mean, we can walk. And you don't. All you have to do is just keep walking when you're going downhill. But it did take a very long time to get any warmth into our hands and feet. That was a bit scary. I had one pea the whole day, and it was the color of a good claret. You know, next week David Hildebrand is going to be talking about medical issues in high altitude bivouacs, but all I know is that we were kind of going off scale at this point medically, but we believed at the time that we could get down the mountain in a day on this side, because we once had, except of course there were no trails this time. So we keep on going down, and somewhere near the Camp 3 altitude, the steepness drops off, and so the whole slope becomes more avalanche prone. And I'm going down, and suddenly I trigger this great wind slab avalanche. You can see below me, and you can see the avalanche has gone away from below me. It's gone down from about a knee deep. Slab's gone. I roll out of the line of the avalanche. Sandy holds me on the rope, and then we gingerly make our way over further to the right. But as we go down, there's nowhere to camp, and we get to a bifurcation in the ridge, and I thought we were supposed to go left. Sandy is convinced we need to go right. So we decided we're going to camp, except there's nowhere to camp. So we just carve out a ledge, and you can see the ice is very close to the surface there. So there's no way we could dig a cave. So we just cut out a ledge and sit on our ropes and get ready for a cold night. Sandy manages to get into what looks like a fairly comfortable position in his lovely warm red line sleeping bag. I was carrying a 3-season Alpine bivouac sleeping bag to save weight. The result was I had a very cold night, and my feet got very cold. I had probably the longest bivouac I can remember. Anyway, yeah, I did watch all the stars go by, but eventually dawn came, and we continued down. At this point, I mean, Sandy writes in his book. I can highly recommend Sandy's book, by the way, In Some Lost Place. Great book. Sandy records vividly his opinion on my mental state. But what he didn't admit to me at the time was his own mental state when he was undoubtedly accompanied by a number of creatures. And communicating with them. Anyway, we're getting down here, and we thought we could hear voices, and we weren't really sure whether they were voices in our heads or voices in our ears. But sure enough, we came around the corner, and here was Marek Holacek, brilliant Czech climber, with his companion just going up for a day's acclimatizing on the normal route prior to going off and trying something else. They were extraordinarily generous. They gave us, I think they were as surprised to see us as we were to see them. They gave us a flask of tea, energy bars, and a valuable lighter. So we were able to stop, have a brew, and regroup slightly. They carried on to their bivouac, and we carried on going down. We're now into the really steep section on the Kinshofer. This is the Kinshofer wall. I'm descending the or maybe Sandy descending the caving ladders. on the Kinshofer wall. And then you get into this huge snow ice couloir that goes on down forever. It's too steep to face out. So we face in, we rope, moving together, roped up, facing in, kicking in for hour after hour. Finally, at 11:30 at night, I look across to my right and I can see a light. This is the guys that our agent has got out of bed in Skardu, has got them down the Karakoram highway, up the 3-day walk into base camp on the Daimir side, and then up to Camp 1 in 36 hours. Pretty amazing. And in the morning, they accompany us down on day, I think we're on to day 18 now, they accompany us down to the Czech base camp where we are plied with cans of beer. And after a day's rest, we were able to walk out to the Karakoram highway. Now, it's quite likely that Cathy O'Dowd's on the line. And now the story of their descent via the shell route is a little epic all of its own. Cathy, are you there?
Yes. Hi, Rick. I'm here.
What about that descent of yours? Tell us in a few words what happened.
Well, clearly the spirit of the presentation is to massively underplay everything. Yes, I like the way you failed to mention that we went up with a 10-day plan and made that first summit attempt on day 11 and still had the entire how are we going to get down again thing to deal with, given that it was going to be a traverse. So yes, for the audience, you can take this with about 3 buckets worth of salt about how out there Rick and Sandy were by the end of this. But the sensible contingent of the team, having decided on the morning of day 12 that there was one place to go and that was down, our plan was to go down the shell route. I knew a little bit about the shell route. I'd talked to a climber in Barcelona who'd done it back in the 1980s. I think I'd read a book. And it was pretty easy. Basically, follow the line, follow the ridge down to 6,000 meters, and then hang a left and kind of make your way down. And we did indeed safely get ourselves down, but the mist came in, as it tended to do, and we missed the hang a left moment at 6,000 meters and ended up too far down and being forced rightwards off the side of the mountain. Going back up seemed much too much like hard work. So we started abseiling down into a bowl where nobody, I think, has ever been because everyone else is too sensible. Zarok and Nuru were pushing ahead. We were roped in 2 pairs. Lakpa and I were going a little more slowly. And as we climbed into the evening, Lakpa slipped on the ice, fell, managed to stop by hitting a rock, but in the process he broke his ankle. Not that we knew it was broken, we just knew it was damaged. And at that point, it was about 10 o'clock at night, and he and I decided we were going to stop because we were now really tired and making mistakes. The trouble was we were in a huge avalanche bowl. We found one sort of prow of rock in the darkness, put our tiny tent in right up under the rock, went to sleep, woke up briefly at about 5 o'clock in the morning because there was some sort of rumbling and avalanche sound and some snow in the air, but nothing much happened, so we went back to sleep. What we didn't realize was the avalanche had come over our heads and we'd been protected by our bow of rock and it basically surfed over us. The other two saw it come down and of course convinced we were dead, whereas we were just sleeping in. We got up a couple of hours later, emerged, reborn to the delight of the other two, and we made our way down. Getting a rescue in there would have been desperately difficult. So Lakpa, in his big solid boot, basically limped his way on down. And it took us the rest of the day to then climb our way down next to a rotten ice fall, and then eventually get down onto the the bottom, and then start looking for our base camp team who knew we were there somewhere, and were trying to meet us as we came down. And so, yeah, all's well that ends well.
That's great. Thanks, Cathy. So a year later, we all met up in Chamonix for a party, where they handed us a PLA d'Or for all the fun we'd had. And with that, I guess I will hand back to Nick. Nick, are you there?
I am indeed. So thanks very much, Rick, and welcome to Cathy. Thanks for joining us. So folks, if there are any questions, do switch on your video. Oh, the trusty Derek Buckle has got a question for us. So go ahead, Derek.
Oh, a fantastic achievement to all of you. Obviously, I've read and I've heard something about this before. But the question I have really is for you, Rick. When you were thinking of that top camp that you were going down, and Sandy then suggests to you, oh, what about going back up? I would like to know what was in your mind at the time. Was it trepidation, relief, or what?
I guess I still really wanted to climb the mountain, but I didn't know if I had it in me. I don't think Sandy knew. Neither of us knew if we had it in us. We just knew that we weren't quite ready to give up, and it was good. It took another 24 hours for us to kind of feel like we might just have enough strength to go again. We both we were really motivated, and Cathy definitely thought we'd lost our reason at that point. I think it would be fair to say, and I don't think she'd disagree with that statement. So it was, we were definitely physically and psychologically pushing at the boundaries.
Yeah, well done, all of you.
So thanks, Derek. And while we're waiting for more questions, Rick, actually, I've got a question for you. So over your long career in the mountains, can you describe to what extent your sort of equipment or techniques have changed during that time period from the mid-80s up until sort of now, perhaps?
Yeah, I was just reflecting the other day that my first Himalayan expedition in 1982 in India, I was wearing a pair of double leather boots, a pair of Galibier Macaloos, which I'm delighted to say I have never worn since. They were quite warm, but they were extremely heavy. So yeah, obviously equipment has improved enormously in the time I've been climbing.
Brilliant. There's a question coming in from Mike Esson. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay. Question for Rick, really. It's a fantastic story of stamina, and there are two components to stamina. There's the muscular stamina and the mental stamina, and it's often said that your mental stamina doesn't decay as rapidly with years as does the muscular one. And my question really is, had you been at the beginning of this climb 20 years earlier with the same gear that you had and the same weather that you had and the same conditions, but without the benefit of the extra 15, 20 years maturity of mental stamina, would the result have been the same? Would you have gone on?
That's a very good question. I don't know, obviously, don't know, hypothetical, but I mean, I had up to that point in 2012, the longest and most demanding thing I'd done was actually back in 1984 when Nick Kikas and I climbed Ganesh 2, and that took us forever to climb and forever to get off, and we ran out of food and we were sick with things all the time, so I'd already at that stage got a sense of that things could be pushed a jolly long way further than you ever thought they could. But there's no doubt that over the years, the experience that both Sandy and I had gained, it all came into play. It all made the difference. So I'm not sure whether earlier we would have had the maturity that we to carry it off that we eventually managed to summon up in 2012.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Good stuff. Thanks, Mike. I can't see any more questions coming in at the moment. Rick, I gather Sandy's out on the hill lambing at the moment. Is that...
Yeah, he's helping a local farmer up near Newton Moor. It's the middle of lambing in Scotland, so yeah, he's very busy.
Good stuff. Well, it looks like we're at the end of the questions. I'm just going to check the chat box to see if there's anything coming in from YouTube. There are just a few comments really saying fantastic achievement, fantastic talk, truly remarkable, incredible journey. I still don't see Sandy and other such things. Oh, and Reinhold would have applauded your efforts. That's a comment from Leo. I don't know which Leo that is, I wonder. And then a comment from John Porter as well, who says, typical Alpine Club, low-key brilliance. Just remains for me to say thanks, Cathy, for joining us there at the last minute. And thanks so much, Rick, for all your time sort of working towards this week. And also, of course, Scott, who joined us direct from Ann Arbor. So I can now announce that next week's Alpine ClubCast, as Rick mentioned, that's number 7, is entitled Medical Dilemmas on Long Bivvies, Severe Headaches, Black Digits, the Squits and more. BMC Honorary Medical Advisor David Hillebrand is chairing a team of 3 mountaineering doctors who are going to share advice, experiences and a question and answer session. So please do join us for that. Thanks all for joining us. Keep safe and keep active. And tonight, we're going to finish with a song you may recognise from another mountaineering doctor, Tom Patey. Feel free to applaud tonight's speakers afterwards, and please unmute yourself if Zoom gives you the option. Good night from London.
That's about you, actually. I sing a bit of a bloody space. What did you learn at the Alpine Club, the Alpine Club, the Alpine Club? What did you learn at the Alpine Club, the jolly old AC? I learned Red Peak was most unfair, 'cause Mac Nord Davis doesn't swear. We must not be too hard on Ted. Ted's well fed, but he's well bred. I heard Dave Jones was hurt before, and he swore he'd take his case to law. Ready for some novel alibi. Tape recorders always lie. That's what I learned at the Alpine Club, the Alpine Club, the Alpine Club. That's what I learned at the Alpine Club, the jolly old AC. Oh, what did you learn about Derek Bull, the bright young blade at the Oxford School? We understand that he was there, but no one knows exactly where. I heard George Lowe was very blue. He didn't quit because of Sue. George was a conscientious lad, and felt he should go home with Dad. That's what I learned at the Alpine Club, the Alpine Club, the Alpine Club. That's what I learned at the Alpine Club, the jolly old AC. But customs change, and so alas, we must be fair to the working class. So we invited good old Joe to come along and join the show. He played his part, he fitted in, he justified our faith in him. We'd like the climbing world to know that the chaps all got on well with the Alpine Club. That's what I learned at the Alpine Club, jolly old AC. The Scottish bunch were all the doer, their attitude was pretty poor. They won't be asked on another stunt by the Alpine Club or Colonel Hunt. The flags are down, St. John's in tears. No more trips for the high pioneers. No more permits for the chaps because of Malcolm Slessor's lapse. That's what I learned at the Alpine Club, the Alpine Club, the Alpine Club. That's what I learned at the Alpine Club, the jolly old AC. Now the moral is we can't afford to lose George Band or Michael Ward. Our proudest battles have been won by chaps like Anthony Lawrence. So let's enjoy racing. Our climbing leaders are no fools, they went to the very best public schools. Never go along with Everest men, we elect them again and again, again and again and again and again. You won't go along with Everest men, they went to the very best public schools. They play the game, they know the rules. So let's all join the Alpine Club, the Alpine Club, the Alpine Club. Let's all join the Alpine Club, jolly old racing. Now the noble blood of an English peer adapts to a rarefied atmosphere. This is why the old school tie may be expected to go high. Up they go, damn good show, stamping steps in the virgin snow. Hey nonny no, fall diddle doll, Jolly John Hunt for the old South Pole. Let's all join the Alpine Club, the jolly old racing. One last question for Sir John, where have all the hard men gone? Good old Joe, why not Don? Where was Christian Bonington? Sir John replied, the mountaineers who accompanied me to the high Pamirs were men of charm and tact and skill, overflowing with goodwill. That's what I learned at the Alpine Club, the Alpine Club, the Alpine Club. That's what I learned at the Alpine Club, the jolly old racing. With a hey nonny no, with a falling